There's new fallout after racist remarks at a Los Angeles City Council meeting were leaked. The council's president has now resigned, saying in a statement, "I take responsibility for what I said, and there are no excuses for those comments." Here's NBC's correspondent, Gadi Schwartz.
LA City Council President Nury Martinez resigning after a leaked audio recording, first reported by the LA Times and obtained by our affiliate KNBC, captured Martinez and council member Kevin De Leon making racist and disparaging remarks in 2021. The attacks targeted fellow council member Mike Bonin and his young son, who is black. The comments, which were spoken behind closed doors in 2021, referred to an MLK parade in which Bonin participated in with his son.
It's like the oddest thing. It's like black and brown on this float. And then there's this white guy with this little black kid who's misbehaved. The kid is bouncing off the effing walls on the float, practically tipping it over.
Martinez is also heard describing the child as a little monkey in Spanish.
They're raising him like a little white kid, which I was like, this kid needs a beat down. Like, let me take him around the corner and then I'll bring him back.
The source of the recording is unknown, and NBC News hasn't determined whether it's been edited, but the LA Times reported that during the conversation, De Leon also appeared to compare Bonin's handling of his son to Martinez carrying a Louis Vuitton handbag. Councilmember Bonin releasing a statement saying, in part, "We are appalled, angry, and absolutely disgusted that Nury Martinez attacked our son with horrific racist slurs and talked about her desire to physically harm him." The conversation reportedly taking place during a meeting that also included Councilmember Gil Cedillo and Ron Herrera, president of the LA County Federation of Labor. The group was discussing the redrawing of council district boundaries. Cedillo and Herrera are not heard on tape making any racist remarks. In a statement, Cedillo apologized and said he should have intervened when racist remarks were uttered, while Herrera said in a statement that there was no excuse for the remarks and his inaction. Martinez and De Leon both issuing apologies over the weekend, with Martinez stating, "In a moment of intense frustration and anger, I let the situation get the best of me, and I hold myself accountable for these comments. For that, I am sorry." De Leon, for his part, said, "There were comments made in the context of this meeting that are wholly inappropriate, and I regret appearing to condone and even contribute to certain insensitive comments made about a colleague and his family in private. I've reached out to that colleague personally."
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to CASA LA's Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Charity Chandler Cole, the CEO of CASA LA. At CASA LA, we organize the community to show up in life and in court to advocate for children and families in LA County's overburdened child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Through an intentional, restorative, and culturally responsive lens, we train a village of committed, consistent, and caring adults who provide equitable, life-affirming connections. Our vision is a Los Angeles County in which all children and families have equitable access to the resources and support they need to be whole and thrive. Our mission and vision cannot be accomplished until our children live in a world that is equitable and just. That's why we are committed to doing our part to address racial injustice in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems, and using this platform, our Fireside Chats, to bring communities and various stakeholders together to have real conversations about what's happening in the world of child welfare in LA County, with the hope of building awareness, informing our communities, activating a safe space for all, and strengthening our ability to advocate for our youth. Today, I have the privilege and honor of introducing you to a phenomenal group of people, all of whom are dedicated to transforming the lives of our youth and families in LA County and beyond. We have someone I would call my brother, Zaid Gale, who is the Executive Director of Peace for Kids, who helps youth in foster care transition successfully into adulthood. Zaid has served on various coalitions and advisory boards to help advance policy that supports the need of resilient youth and communities. Representing the 2nd Supervisorial District, he was appointed to the Los Angeles County Commission for Children and Families in 2019. In addition, he co-chairs the Racial Justice Committee for the Commission, with a focus on addressing racial disproportionality and disparity among Black families. Maria Brenes is the Executive Director of Inner City Struggle, which seeks to promote healthy, safe, and nonviolent communities for youth and families on the east side of Los Angeles. Since 2002, she has spearheaded an expansion of the influence of students and community residents in decision-making about Los Angeles public schools, mobilizing thousands of Latinx parents and students in the east side of Los Angeles. We have the Honorable Marguerite Downing, who is a judge for the Los Angeles County Superior Court in California. Prior to her appointment to the bench in 2007, she served as a deputy public defender for the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office for 18 years. During her time on the Superior Court, she also served on the Incarcerated Parent Working Group for Los Angeles County at Children's Court. And last but certainly not least, we have Ashley Williams, who was born a product of rape and raised in the foster care system. She lived in 36 placements, with McLaurin Hall being the first of many, and attended 26 schools by the time she turned 18. Ashley went on to attend UCLA, where she co-founded the Bruin Guardian Scholars Program, which assists former foster youth in navigating the university system. She then attended Southwestern Law School. Ashley spent her final summer and fall semester as a certified law clerk for the Children's Law Center, advocating for foster youth at Children's Court. Since May 2019, she has worked at the Los Angeles Dependency Lawyers as Parents Counsel. She oversees Dream Court, a specialized courtroom serving minors who are victims of CSAC. And because of her lived experience, academic achievements, and professional qualifications, Ashley is able to provide a unique voice and insight into the child welfare system. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us, and welcome to our Fireside Chat. For our audience, we will take a few questions towards the end if time permits, so please submit a question if you have one in the Q&A. So let's get into it. It's no secret that our city has been shaken by an unearthed conversation among individuals that we expect to uplift and respond to the needs of all community members. We've heard a lot of dialogue around the redistricting, power grabs, erasure of Black political power, and Council Member Mike Bonin's adopted Black son being called a monkey, and compared his being transracially adopted to being an accessory for the council member, all of which is disgusting and deplorable. And for the record, CASA of Los Angeles condemns. But what we haven't heard much of is any dialogue around the implications that these conversations, and more importantly, prejudice against specifically Black and Indigenous groups have when it comes to uplifting racial justice in our child welfare system. LA County as a whole has been working to address racial inequality and inequity across systems and institutions. I am personally a part of many of those discussions and task force, as are some of you here. What worries me is that as we're working and making strides to create policies and find solutions, that when it comes to practice and implementation, those in positions of power could very well potentially hinder the work or direct the efforts away from groups or individuals that need it most. Racism, as once defined by Dr. Martin Luther King, is racial prejudice plus social power. And we have just witnessed both of those key ingredients from those we thought had our communities back and, quite frankly, trusted with addressing issues that impact the young people we serve every day. Using this lens to start, but also understanding that they aren't the only ones, and that anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous, and colorism are very much alive. What are all of your thoughts? Whoever wants to comment, just your thoughts and feelings about the remarks made by those that have decision-making power over our communities, and most importantly, our children impacted by the child welfare system. Who would like to get us started? I will pick on folks. I'm gonna start with maybe Maria. How are you feeling? And Zaid, your thoughts.
Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel, Charity. I have felt just shame and anger over the remarks that were shared by 4 Latinx leaders. As you said, we thought in our community represented our values of equity and justice and representation and respect and solidarity. And the audio leak revealed that they undermine so much of the work that many of us have done for decades to build multiracial solidarity and alliances across our communities, and try to heal and bridge our efforts and our work and our agendas toward not just advancing racial equity, but also centering Black lives and directly challenging anti-Black racism in our communities, including the Latinx community and across Los Angeles. And what that conversation revealed is we still have a lot of work to do in our communities, in addition to it with our representatives and holding them accountable and ensuring that they are supporting and advancing policies that reflect the values of racial solidarity, anti-racism, issues and programs and policies and resource allocations that actually center communities, populations that have been, most impacted by white supremacy. So I'm also hopeful because I think so many of us have come together to denounce and disassociate ourselves with the worldviews that were expressed in that conversation. And I know my organization, that has worked to build power on the east side of LA, People Power, has been very intentional in cultivating Black-Brown solidarity and has advanced, social justice, educational justice, tenant rights for nearly 30 years. I mean, we've been very clear that the council members in our area, the East Side, need to resign and need to resign immediately. We have picketed the offices of Kevin De Leon, and this week we organized an East Side South LA march in Eagle Rock to Kevin De Leon's home, joining forces with Black Lives Matter to again reiterate that we need to have his resignation ASAP so we can move forward. So to me, in crisis, there are opportunities. I think there's an opportunity for solidarity, for unifying our city, and for demanding policies that center racial justice, that center Black and Brown youth and families, that uplift the messages of addressing anti-Black racism, whether it's in the issues of housing, education, child welfare. I think this is an opportunity to lift up the policy demands that we all have been talking about, to overinvest in housing, to overinvest in tenant protections, to overinvest in supportive and permanent housing infrastructure for our communities, and to decriminalize in many fronts our families, our young people. I think, as we continue to call for resignations, I think there's an opportunity to get clarity on what demands, policy changes we want to come together on and build power around them and continue pushing, right? It's not just one thing to say we're anti-racist, it's another thing to act on those things. And so to hold the city council, the county board of supervisors, the boards of education across LA County, I think the time is now and there's an opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to, before Zaid chimes in, I want to say I'm hopeful too, Maria, because of people like you. And I want to publicly state this because we heard your bio, but you also sit on the commission with us. You're also a part of the Racial Justice Committee, and you have a platform and a position of power and leadership where, yes, we have policies, but making sure there's accountability when implementing them and acting on them is so important. But to see you, I saw the video of the protest, of this past weekend with Black Lives Matter and everyone else. And I saw you in that video and I was like, look at Maria, you go girl. But I was just so happy because when I first heard the news, I got a little scared. I've been a part of many Black and Brown coalitions trying to strengthen our communities and build and grow together. And I was concerned about what the response would be, but the immediate response across the board was solidarity, was accountability on both fronts. And I think it's so important that when we talk about hope and action, what that looks like, it is holding ourselves accountable and each other accountable. And to see that play out in the way in which it did just brought me a lot of hope. Because I know there are people that speak it, but then there are people like you, Maria, that acted. And I just want to thank you for being one of those people's in position of power and leadership that actually walk the talk. So thank you. All right, Saeed.
No, thank you. And I echo what Sister Charity said. And I just want to acknowledge that I feel privileged to be here in discussion with you, dynamic women, who I all have great respect for in many different ways, and who I've had the privilege of spending some time with on various opportunities in our community. And for me, it raised up, in addition to what Maria shared, this concern I have around policies and the implementation of policies that are historic and have been centered around white body supremacy. And, I don't want us to forget that the conversation that was being had was around redistricting, right? And so the concern was around how money is being distributed in communities. And we recognize that to a strong degree, so much of the problems that are affecting Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous communities, have to do with the distribution of wealth. And that there have been practices and policies that have affected the way that Black communities and communities of color have accelerated their wealth. You can talk about redlining and the way communities were drawn, the access to resources, and the way those resources have been distributed, the lending practices of banks. But there's so much that's kind of said in the statement that was not said when they talked about how they wanted to allow money to be the governing factor of how they were going to draw these lines and who was going to get access to those funds and who was not. So I want us to really recognize that this conversation, and this is not to say that the racial discussion is not warranted, but what I also want to lift up, which I think is in decorrelation, is a correlation around access and resources and the disparity that exists in that domain. If we're not having conversations about how we are distributing wealth, how we are empowering communities and empowering people to engage in this conversation around access, then we're limiting our possibilities. Because we know in the child welfare space, one of the determining factors of why families get involved in child welfare systems have to do with poverty. Yeah. And so if we're not thinking about how we can eradicate policies that lend to impoverished communities, impoverished people of color, how we can hold our council members, and to your point, Maria, our board of supervisors accountable for the policies that they're passing, that engage in anti-Blackness, that engage in anti-Indigenous approaches, then we're failing as communities and citizens. And I want to encourage everybody to, we're less than 2 weeks out from midterm elections, and I know folks can feel disassociated from the need to engage in the electoral process because of these kind of conversations. So what I'm hopeful for is that this is a reinvigoration of our interest as citizens to engage in the voting process, to hold people accountable, to realize that it doesn't just happen in the voting box when you decide to elect someone, that it's the continual engagement in your civic process to advance issues of justice that you think are important for communities that will lead to systemic change. Because right now we have the tendency to look at one issue, focus on it, but forget that we actually hold the power as a people to make the changes we need to see.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Before we move on to the next one, Ashley or Judge Downey, Dr. Downey works too. Would you like to comment on your feelings and thoughts when this all kind of broke down? And you could even say in relation to the work that you do. If not, we can move on.
I actually don't comment on political matters. It's just
Right.
a pet peeve of mine, so I won't address the whole issue, but I will say that I do agree with Zaid regarding being focused on access and resources for families. And particularly, that's an issue that we have here in Children's Court. As a Parents Council, it's very tough to try to address some like mental health needs, homelessness, some of the issues that may have brought these families to the court when there's no access, to these resources, or some of these resources are not even available anymore. So I'll agree to the point of we do need to focus on how to rebuild the community and rebuild more resources and making them more readily available to families to access, to prevent them from even coming in contact with our system to begin with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley.
And as an elected official, as a judicial officer, I take a neutral approach to politics, but I do want to applaud some of the comments that Said had made, because one of the things is, I don't think that our community understands the trickle down effect for the folks you elect are the folks who make decision about housing, mental health services, and all those things. And unfortunately, I don't believe either the department or community organizations really look to registering and educating those youth that come through our courts about their role in making some different changes. And as you mentioned, we need to educate you, don't just vote, but you do vote. But we educate them about voting and all the implications of why we vote and the things that trickle down to us. And I think that that is a space for that we can make improvement on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. So let's stay on that topic. You know, Zaid, you said the correlation between access and resources, and everyone has brought up pretty much mental health, but most importantly, and also housing or homelessness. So homelessness amongst transition age youth and non-minor dependents is on the rise in Los Angeles. And homelessness impacts the families we see. And it's often a major factor to being able to keep families together or reunify families that have been separated. We also know that 33% of those experiencing homelessness are Black. Huge disproportionality when it comes to the percentage of Black people in LA County. And 42% of those experiencing homelessness are Latino. That's 75% of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles are Black and brown. Yet Los Angeles agencies have returned over $150 million in federal funds to house homeless people over the past 6 years. That, in my opinion, is racial injustice. And it begs the question how homelessness will be a factor for parents moving forward, because it's not always a lack of resource situation. It's, do we have the right people positioned to implement the funding and the policies when they come through? Do we have the right people in place to ensure that our communities are educated on what their rights are, what's out there, what's accessible, how to access these resources? When I saw $150 million had to be returned, and we have a huge homelessness crisis here in LA, and that 75% of the people that are unhoused are Black and brown, that bothers me. And that makes me question, are we a priority, and where do we move forward with this? And I just want to kind of hear your thoughts on that, knowing that homelessness is such a huge issue, and we had the opportunity and we missed it.
Well, I think that Ashley would join me in saying that homelessness is a huge challenge for the parents that we see in court. Now, being homeless in and of itself is not a reason to remove children. But what happens is parents who are experiencing homelessness often drop their children off with family members who don't have the resources to care for them. Once again, poverty, and they turn to the department, and the department steps in, and we all know what happens when the department steps in. We were talking about, and there are programs, there's like a 211, the county has a 211 program. The Department of Children and Family Services has now got a pilot project to help children that can almost go home based on a parent's progress. And they will assist with housing. And once housing is achieved, then the children just automatically return home. But as I mentioned, the LA Times had a really bright ray of hope that there is a new program called Short-Term Eviction Prevention Fund. It was started as a philanthropic endeavor by Adam and Stacy Miller, who made millions of dollars on technology. And it is short-term microloans to families who have resources, who've experienced a financial challenge in a short period of time and have the resources with a little assistance to maintain their housing as opposed to being evicted. And the microloans are about $2,500. And so there's an article about a woman on the front page of the LA Times the other day who, with $500 from that program, was able to catch up and move into better housing with that $500. So a small amount of money sometimes is the Band-Aid that needs to happen. It's not always about housing, but we see every day in court, parents are living with vouchers at motels. They've got short-term housing. And one of the challenges for families are parents are in Section 8 housing, the court steps in, we remove children because it's unsafe. They lose their Section 8 housing because their Section 8 housing is predicated on so many people in the homes. Or we have a family member that we can send children to so they're not with strangers, but they're living in a Section 8 housing situation and they can't have additional people move in. So there needs to be some look at rules that we're working through in the courts that have some flexibility not to change the reason the home is Section 8 or whatever, but we have the opportunity to make some adjustments to deal with children that are coming in and out of the foster care system that we just don't have the flexibility to deal with. And as you've mentioned, it's mostly families of color because it's an issue of poverty.
Yeah, I love that you said that, but then also you made me think about when it comes to the whole reason I would say why a lot of the funding went back is because there are so many rules with a lot of these housing programs, what even could be considered eligible for housing. And so that's why at CASA, our housing partnerships are with folks that have been bold enough to create non-traditional housing that doesn't have, you're not handcuffed by all the policies and procedures, and our children and families are really able to go into spaces and situations where they could thrive, where they can make mistakes, where, they could reunify, they can move in without their children and have a process of, reunification actually being established. But also when it comes to Section 8, there should be, it just shows the lack of understanding and awareness and ability to respond to the needs of people that actually use Section 8. If we know that that's a big issue and barrier, folks over Section 8 should be in cahoots with our child welfare system to say, we're not going to take away your Section 8 for that reason. There should be some communication, some coordination. And when we have systems not working together and causing additional layers of oppression and trauma, that's where the issue lies. And we have an opportunity to really uplift that and say across the board, we need to start over. I am an abolitionist. Everyone knows that. But when I say abolitionist, it's not always do away or defund. It's let's just start over. Let's just start over and do right. Sometimes it's too much to reform certain things. We just need to start from scratch, redo our policies, because that's where we have the power. The institutions that exist who are working off of old policies, old procedures, doing business as usual. As we're coming up with systems change, as we're actively fighting for racial justice, and we have all these motions, as we're doing this work, no matter how good, no matter what meetings Zaid and Maria and I are in, no matter what amazing solutions we come up with, you all still have to operate off of those raggedy ass policies because y'all not changing it. We can't do our work if you're not going to do your work. And so it's just so important that as we're making progress on one end, that the systems and programs that we rely on to serve our children and families are also moving, we're settling on the same shit. Progress is moving along, but then they're still back there not even trying to catch up. They just there. So that's something we need to really, really focus on. But actually, I saw that you unmuted if you want to chime in on that.
No, I would agree with all of what Judge Downing was saying. As the parent attorney representing these parents, I think the reality is this: all of us in this room, right, on this Zoom, we get it, right? I think the real people who should be in these rooms are the systems who are like DPSS and other organizations and mental health services. I think there's a disconnect, especially with housing. I do think we get a lot of the families who are, maybe they first start off with, just having a housing issue, but then if they're not able to, access the Section 8, list, or if they're not able to move in with a family member, they're even further discouraged. And some parents, they revert back to, if it's, a substance abuse case, they do get discouraged, and, they can't get their kid back because now they've relapsed because they don't have housing, or they don't have the financial access to even, pay for, first month's rent or whatever it may be. But I do think the main issue is we can't really fix too many parts of the systems that are mental health services, too many of the systems that are DPSS social services. I think for us, it's recognizing when we're in court representing our clients, especially for parents, it's advocating and educating the bench on resources that are out there. I think it's also the department taking responsibility as well, and doing its due diligence for resources, and us just actually being real with what's available out there and what the reality is. I get that we operate with these strict guidelines and these strict timelines of when a kid can either go home or when they can't. But many times, though, we say in the Black letter law, you can't, not return a kid because they don't have, the parent doesn't have a home. But oftentimes that is the problem, right? And oftentimes a lot of kids don't go home. And it's further, further traumatizing an entire family when one issue they came in simply for housing, or simply because they can't have access to a state to get a job or something like that to pay for the rent. I do think not only is it housing being an issue, but it's transportation, right? It's us ordering them into programs and services, knowing that they have no money to access these services, right? Or can't even pay for, the transportation to even get to their visits. I think we also have to take responsibility and understand what role we play, right? And the privilege and power that we play in this courthouse from every angle, and how we are impacting these families and being very intentional and understanding that, yes, Black people are most definitely overrepresented in this child welfare system. And part of that is because we have so many of these families that are connected and linked to different systems already that form this type of institutional racism in a sense. You have parents who go through a parent can give birth, a mother can give birth at the children's hospital, and they're automatically given a drug test. Doesn't mean that they've done drugs or anything like that, but they're automatically given a drug test just for the simple fact that they can give a drug test, right? And let's say this parent does come up with the positive talks, boom, DCFS is already involved. Instead of involving community leaders or truly assessing the situation, you have a lot of these parents who are in probation systems, you have people who are in educational systems, they're all linked and tied, right? And so I think we all have to be accountable with how we're using these systems and at what we're doing actually to further either traumatize, or are we really helping these families? And lastly, I'll just say, I think we need to be more mindful of not just trying to help just the kids, right? People have to understand to respect the family unit, right? And understand that parents, yes, they're going to need help, right? Not judging them, not being so negative towards them. If we're saying that we're trying to help them as a family unit, give them resources and services that are family focused, not just one kid here, with individual counseling, mom, you do individual counseling over here, but how to mend this family unit, right? And how to fix this and keep them, I guess, building their relationships as well, because it does take a toll on an entire family unit, right? And I think our services and our courts need to be a little bit more family focused and family centered services, not just individual.
Yes. And oh my gosh, you just made me think of, I had a flashback of when I was in children's court with my mom. And when you say family centered services, the first thing that came to mind that we don't even talk about is, and keeping in mind that only 12% of cases are abuse, majority of our families are in this system because of neglect that stems from poverty. So taking that lens, how we address and talk to and speak to our parents. I remember, and I've spoken to children and youth recently, that the respect that's lost for parents, the how we show up, the defiance, all of that, a lot of that stems from how they're seeing other adults in these systems interact with their parents. They see their parents being disrespected, degraded, devalued. They're being told your parents are bad or worthless, aren't good enough. And then when we expect the reunification to happen, which I'm seeing before my eyes, there's a loss of respect, a loss of trust, a loss of familiarity. Like, we are doing so much damage and harm simply because we don't even give parents the respect they deserve when we're interacting with them. And their children are watching this. Their children are watching this. So that's just something, when we say family centered, how we respect our families, especially Black families in brown, who walk this earth every day being disrespected everywhere they go, walking. I can't walk into a store to this day and not feel like I'm being watched. Today, like, we're treated like lower class citizens everywhere we go. And then we're treated like that in the courtroom and in these social services spaces with our children, but we expect our children to have respect for us through that process. Like, I just want to, you just random off to the side, but when you say family centered, I just think it's so important to uplift that, because our children are watching, and it is not in the best interest of the child, as the term we love to say, to treat their parents like that. In their presence. So I'm going to, it's 12:37. We have some amazing questions in the chat. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to jump to the Q&A. And the question for Governor, it's not happening. I can cause more trouble, not in office. So that's where I like to be. But thank you. So I want to go into this question. So those that know me know that I've experienced both the foster care system, the juvenile justice system, and the criminal justice system. I've been to jail 3 times, for those that don't know. Twice as a minor for being poor and stealing underwear for my little sister, and once as an adult at 18 years old because I fled my abusive group home. They called it AWOL, and I had a warrant out for my arrest, and I got to spend about a good several weeks in adult jail for that. I was punished and criminalized, and like many Black children, adultified and over-sexualized and not seen as a child that was worthy and in need of protection and support. As a result, I've spent the past 17 years fighting against those injustices, and as a founding board member of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, shout out to their 10-year anniversary, one of the things we fought hard for was ensuring our laws and policies stop the unnecessary punishment and cruel sentencing of our young Black and brown children. Of the many things discussed around the racist remarks from our council members and labor leader, there wasn't much talk about the constant equating of Black children and Black bodies with punishment. And the 2-year-old at the time, you know, the words that were used and that we heard playing was that he needed to be taken around the corner by an adult stranger to have his ass beat. And I really want to talk about that because I feel like our system has really normalized and justified violence against Black children, so long as it's not their parents being the one doing it. But our systems can do it, our police can do it. And even if we take out the who can do it part, the fact that there wasn't enough discussion around this little Black boy being punished, and just how as a system, that's how we justify that. And out of everything that was said that day, that's the part that hurt me the most, because we see police brutality, we see how children and families are treated in, you know, whether in the juvenile justice system or criminal justice system. I personally experienced and witnessed it. And this little boy was only 2 years old at the time, and he has, you know, decades ahead of him where he, you know, that seems like it's small now, but he has a journey he's going to go through as a Black boy where he is going to be looked at as a criminal, as a villain. And already at 2 years old, that rhetoric, you know, that language has been used to define who he is. And I just have a big problem with that. And so I just want to kind of, you know, and as we look at our child welfare system and the foster care to prison pipeline, which is a very real thing, you know, how do we show up in support of addressing that and of negating that, you know, within our groups and as individuals and in the work that we do to instill in our children that they're not criminals, that they don't deserve punishment simply for, you know, having childlike behavior, you know. And this, go ahead.
Well, who's going, me or Maria?
Well, you unmuted and Maria.
I did unmute because
so,
you know, sis, you got me all.
I'm gonna be like ladies first. Go ahead, Maria.
You know, go ahead, Maria, because you know, Charity gets me all worked up on this issue because you know I got something to say. But I'll let you.
I will be brief. I wanted to talk about the work I've been involved with in trying to dismantle the school to jail pipeline at LAUSD, which is the largest district in LA County in the state, second largest in the country, majority students of color, and punitive measures, school discipline measures, have for too long done exactly what you described, Charity, criminalized students of color, in particular Black students, both Black male students and Black female students, and over suspended, over expelled, and have at will, you know, overused arrests to deal with behavior, to deal with normal adolescent childhood reactions to situations, and had, you know, those children had different skin color, a lighter skin color. If they were not students of color, I don't believe we would have a school police system in LAUSD that was voted on and supported in the 80s when this idea of our children as super predators was being promoted. And so that's when you saw the development of what is now the largest school police force in the nation. You know, in over 10 years ago, we helped form a multiracial coalition called the Brothers Themselves Coalition that unites Black, Latinx, Indigenous, LGBTQ students, API students, and demanded the implementation of a school climate bill of rights, which was a 10-point system that called for the end of willful defiance suspensions, which were a very broad category You could be suspended for talking back to a teacher,
Mhm.
or violating dress code, for not bringing the right materials to class. And it was used indiscriminately against students of color across LAUSD, disproportionately against Black students. And it was something that was under the radar. And it was the youth organizing work that called it out, that forced the data to come out. And we proposed a solution, the School Climate Bill of Rights, that ultimately, through pressuring the school board in 2013, ended willful defiance suspensions, became the first district in the nation to do so, also limited the role of school police. And as a result, more students of color graduated from LAUSD, more stayed. And we also won the implementation of more restorative justice programs. There's still more work to do.
Mhm.
In 2020, we joined Black students who've been calling for a redirecting
Mhm.
of punishment dollars, of arrest dollars in school police toward the creation of the Black Student Achievement Program. We supported that. We fought very hard and created over $100 million fund in the creation of a Black Student Achievement Program directed towards schools with the highest concentration of Black students in LAUSD. And we have to keep it going. We have to fight to make sure those types of programs are funded every year. And what I'm most proud of is the young people who spoke their truth, even though they went through very hard, sometimes humiliating situations when they were arrested or
Mhm.
suspended. They were unafraid to go to the school board and tell their stories, even when some school board members accused them of not telling the truth, of being controlled by adults. And I think that's something that to me is really shameful when
Yeah.
Black young people speak their truth. They're told it's not the truth.
Yep.
That's something we also have to defend their voices. And, it was their stories, their power, their organizing that has moved LAUSD in a better direction. And we have to support them as adults. So just
Yeah.
wanted to add that to the
I
conversation.
love that. And before Zaid goes, I just got to say that word redirection. I wrote that down. I'm gonna start using that one instead of the other one, because I know what you did there. That's good. But also, our children that have the label foster care or foster children are the ones that more likely are being punished in this way. And I was a relative caregiver for almost 13 years to my nephew, and remember being FaceTimed by my son while the police were arresting him in the school because someone said, there was like this butt slapping game where kids doing it. They still doing it now, from what I hear. But they came and arrested my nephew because once you have that label on your name, you can be messed with. You can be arrested, you can be handcuffed and walked and escorted through the school with your children. They didn't know who his auntie was, so we cleared that up real quick. But the fact that they tried that, and then I had to go through a whole process of making sure that school knew to never do that again, and had to fight, and they were found to be out of compliance. And I would love to see when it comes to the school to prison pipeline, but especially with how they handle our children that are in the foster care system, because they feel no one's going to stand up for them and come for them and have their back, that you should be fined. Every time you abuse your administrative authority and call the police and waste resources instead of helping support our kids that are in the system, and your thing is to call the police and punish them, you should be fined because you are wasting resources and abusing your administrative authority. So if I do run ever, which is not happening, that would be that. Maria, go ahead, take that up, girl. That's your area. Take that up. But it's serious because that's how they treat our kids in the system. And they need to know. That's why having a CASA for me is so important, because they're not, if schools know one of our kiddos have a CASA, they're not going to have that energy. They're not going to treat that child the same. But it's so important that we protect our kids that are in these spaces that for the most part we put them in. Zaid.
Well, I want to thank you all for lifting up what you're doing, Maria, in the school system, and Charity, of course, bringing it back to race and identity in the way that it shows up. And what I want to say in summation of all the things that y'all have brought up is that United States is a carceral state. So I just want to say that from slave patrols to now, we have made our living off the incarceration of people of color. That's just how we've done it. Now, whether that is a mental incarceration or physical incarceration, There is a need to look at the preservation of the white body and to use the oppression of darker skinned bodies on the color scale to support that identity. So I know I'm not saying anything to the folks here that don't agree with that. But what I want to say in the context is related to the other conversation that you brought up, which is how do we address this need for the physical abuse to Black and brown bodies as a tool for suppression and oppression. And of course, this comes back from slavery time. So I'm not saying anything that you guys don't know, again. And when we talk about our lands of origin, when we look at our lands of origins, particularly in Al-Kibu land in Africa, they don't beat their children because in the construct of who they believe their children are, they believe that they are their ancestors. They are the reincarnation of the ancestors in the spirit. So they do not lay their hands on their children in the lands of origin. This is something that has been taught to us by those who have used physical bodied oppression to keep us at a level of being oppressed. Now, we have adopted those principles as people of color because we want to keep our family safe. One thing that you often heard as a Black child growing up is that I'm doing this and it hurts me more than it hurts you, because they're intentionally trying to protect you from harm when you step outside of the house. So how crazy is that we had to adopt the principles of those who have physically oppressed us to continue to oppress our kids so that when they go out into the world, they don't fall victim to some of the carceral events that we know will take the livelihood of our children. So we'd rather have a small dosage of pain now to encourage you to engage in protecting your body when you step out into the world. So that's one thing I want to just make sure that we unpack. The conditions that exist here around the oppression of children in spaces through physical means have come from the very people who have created the policies and practices that continue to keep us in a carceral state. To say this differently and to say it more kind of holistically is there is no human rights for children in this context of if I'm an adult and I hit Charity, then I have to suffer the consequence. I can be charged with assault. We have the ability legally to hit children. That ability is recognized because when you think about the slave codes and the things that were written, it allowed folks who were in power to remove the parental rights of others who do not have the ability to discipline, to care for, do their kids, so they can be used for the capital interest of those who have power. So we need to be in the business of beginning to unpack. So in the same way that Maria has worked on looking at discipline in schools, we need to look at how we look at discipline for all people. What are we allowing to say as a disciplinary action that is allowed to exist in our state of, in our carceral state? Because we allow things to happen in prison. We know that when I talk about mental incarceration, right, that we know that Black and brown folks are put into isolation in greater numbers, right? We know that there's more Black and brown folks incarcerated. So this is a continual thing to abuse brown and Black bodies to keep systems of oppression in place. And it extends to our children. We train our children for those same outcomes. And it's something we should consider abolishing, to use your words.
Well, I do want to address one of the comments you made about we can't beat our children, because we can't beat our children. And we are starting to realize that there is age-appropriate physical discipline, and then there is physical discipline that becomes abuse. So we're not, we haven't corrected all the problems, but I think that the courts are taking some of those things into consideration when we look at cases. I think as we look at, our time is running out, I think one of the lessons is, in spite of all that stuff going on in the community, we each need to take ownership of how we treat the people in the community that we see and we talk to. We need to always be mindful, and sometimes it's hard because we have very busy calendars, as you all know, but we have to take the time to greet children who come into court. We have to take the time to greet the parents, and to greet them like, not just, oh, hey, come on in, good afternoon, good morning. Sometimes they're called mom, dad, sometimes they're called by their last name, but we need to acknowledge them. And as funny and sad as it is, You mentioned I chair the Incarcerated Parents Working Group. A couple of years ago, one of the attorneys said, "Wow, Your Honor, I've never seen that done." And I was thinking, what did I just do? And she said, "You turned around," because they bring incarcerated parents into our courtroom. She said, "You turned around and you spoke to him." Now, I didn't think it was anything big, but apparently her complaint was, as a parents' counsel, that parents who were incarcerated came into court, and in the old days, no one looked up to acknowledge that parent. We here at Edelman have had an incarcerated parents working group for the last 9 years. And as part of that, we have worked to train the bench officers, the attorneys, and our stakeholders that we need to be mindful of the needs of families that have incarcerated parents. We have worked to train the department to understand that these children still have parents. Although they are not here in court, they are still parents. And part of us acknowledging and working with that parent goes back to what Charity said. It's in the best interest of the children. We're not doing it because it's in the best interest of the parents, unfortunately, but we're working to do it because it's in the best interest of this child, because in spite of what that parent has done or alleged to have done, that child cares about that parent. And if we want to take care of the whole child, we need to acknowledge and respect the parent that is not in the building, but is incarcerated.
I love that. Ashley, were you unmuting?
I was just saying, I echo everything Judge Downing was saying, just as far as respect. I do think that we should have more trainings with our bench officers on racial biases and implicity, as well as accountability, as well training for all of the attorneys. So I'm hopeful, and hopefully whoever's listening, we can kind of get refocused on just basic level of respect and checking ourselves daily.
Yeah, I say let's do it. And I know we don't have time to answer the questions in the chat, but I think that as we're having these trainings, that it can't be just CLC having a training, LATO having a training, the bench officers having a training, CASA, et cetera. We should all be showing up to the same training at the same time and having dialogue and conversation with each other on how we approach these situations so that we have a united front versus fighting each other and who's trying to win what case and who's trying to present the best argument. We should be working in unison with each other, in support of one another. And we can't do that if we're taking different trainings, learning differently, have different approaches. If we really want to focus on the best interest of the child, we should be doing it together. And I want to end with us really, taking a minute each to touch on what are the things you are doing, either individually or in your roles, to address racial justice for our children and families. And I can go first. I'll start us off. At CASA LA, we just launched our new prevention and intervention program. We're working to stop and prevent the intergenerational cycle of system involvement and making sure that our pregnant and parenting young mothers have access to the resources and support they need to be phenomenal mothers or reunify with their children. We've partnered with housing resources to provide non-traditional forms of housing that's going to really focus on uplifting and supporting our young people and helping them navigate systems and situations. We have mental health partnerships where we have telemental health and working on different modalities that we're going to introduce to the bench around somatic therapies and different forms of mental health that are in our community, for our community, to be more supportive of providing holistic approaches. And I'm happy to say that I've spoken with a few judges in the court and they're very responsive. You mentioned earlier, Ashley, that the court and bench also needs to be educated, and they want to be. They want to know what's out there. They want to know if they don't know what's working, that they haven't seen evidence or reports on. And so we're making sure that we're doing our part to bring that to them so that they can make, as they're making recommendations and mandates, that they're saying that this is what we also agree with. So I'll shut up. What are you all doing?
Well, not nearly what you're doing, obviously. We're still working on the incarcerated parents. My goal is that I treat each family as I want my family to be treated. And that could be a lot of different things. One of the things we didn't talk about training is the court. We go out into the community. And I think as we talk about training, we don't need to just do training in this building. We need to do training out in the community to let people know what they should expect, how they can make their experience better, and what services there are so that they really understand what happens to them when they have to come to court, to children's court.
I love that. Love that.
Okay, I'll go. So we're engaged in a whole lot of leadership development for young folks who have lived experience in foster care. I see Sister Marketia Hines is in the house. So we're also training folks who have lived experience in what we call heart-centered connections. So it's a training program that teaches people how to regulate their nervous systems. We want folks in education system, healthcare systems, law enforcement systems to understand how to mitigate their own biases when they step into relationship with children of color, how to regulate themselves to allow that child or that family to feel safe in the presence. And so that begins with regulating our own nervous systems and understanding how to do that effectively. So we have people with lived experience who are going out into systems to train others how to regulate themselves and check their biases at the door when they engage with families and people of color. The other thing that we're doing, we have an initiative called Rock Move that's being led again by folks who have lived experience, which is all about changing the narrative that exists. One of the things that we've done through our research is identify that media is one of the primary influencers in the way that people perceive folks who have lived foster care experience. This is, of course, associated with people of color because we know that our child welfare systems, particularly in LA, is predominantly children of color. So we're working to create more authentic narratives that represent the foster care experience to help people change their biases through the media they consume.
Love that. Thank you, Saeed.
One thing that Inner City Struggle, my organization, is very focused on right now is getting our communities out to vote. November 8th, there are a lot of important initiatives on the ballot, including around housing. There's Measure ULA, and there's, state propositions related to reproductive justice. And so it's really important our communities have their voices heard at the ballot box. So please encourage your neighbors, your friends, others, your relatives, your coworkers to vote. Voting centers are starting to open this weekend, and we have until November 8th to, have our voices heard.
Thank you, Maria. And I know Ashley is contributing by running herself to court right now as we speak to fight for some of her clients. So thank you, Ashley. And
Actually, I'm so sorry. Thank you.
But thank you all so very much. I so appreciate you all, the wealth of knowledge that I learned just from engaging and speaking with you all. And let's continue to fight for racial justice every single day for our communities.